Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Munson Steed and rolling out, and you are at a seat at the table where you see the foremost premier thought leadership ever to happen today. We are so proud to have Dr. Julianne Malveaux, clearly a true thinker and a mover and a shaker, but more than anything, a dedicated um, person and loving woman who has all the sister with superpowers moments that I hope any young sister hoping to have at least a life thread that they can follow as they go invisibly, but give them the strength to stand up when others are telling you to sit down, to train your mind and heart, to serve the people and know that you can and still be authentically yourself. Welcome to A Seat at the Table, Dr. Malveaux. How are you?
I'm great, Munson. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it's you who has me. I'm clearly so proud and always proud. We're talking about leadership and equity, and one of the things that I've noticed about a generation of young Black people is, and I'm not sure if it's imposter syndrome, so you can share it, but in their leadership of their own lives, they've begun to give agency to the oppressive culture of America and don't believe that they deserve to be great, excellent, respected. Can you share why they're divulging the leadership position that they should be um, moving toward in thought leadership, academics?
You know, the prevailing culture is a culture that we live in. We have to actively resist that culture. We Black people too frequently get messages we're not worthy. Or if we're worthy only if we cut and paste ourselves so that we can't be our authentic selves. I cannot tell you how many times over the course of my life that a white person has basically said something to me like, well, you'd be so attractive if you could grow hair. Well, hair growth is a human function. And basically, at that time, it was like I was up for certain things in majority media, and they thought I would be more palatable if I grew hair. Now, this is years ago. Today, we see sisters rocking all kinds of styles, and I love it. I just actually envy that generation to be able just to do that. But at the same time, what we know is that we live in a prevailing culture that sends us messages that don't value us. So we actively, I mean, literally actively have to resist those notions. And so we have to say to ourselves, I am enough, I am worthy, I am great, I am a leader. It sounds like mamby-pamby, but it isn't. It's to remind yourself who you are and whose you are, what foundations you stand on, and what those who went before you had to deal with. Because this is not the first generation, mine is not the first generation. We flash back to enslavement and the people who asserted themselves even in the middle of enslavement, asserted who they were. And so that white America will always make you seem to be less than, not enough, you need to cut and paste. Even down to it's not just imagery, leadership, the whole notion of being palatable. I mean, I get in trouble a lot for going off. Well, I go off because there's a reason to go off. Now, I admit in my older age, that I look back and say, man, I didn't have to do it that way, but maybe I did. And, go telling someone they cannot go off when they have been placed in a position where they have to, is essentially assertion of white supremacy. I'll tell you a funny story. It's years old. I was with some economists last week in New Orleans, colleagues, and I was on a panel of cornerstone economists. Now, I didn't know that I was old enough to be a cornerstone. I told them I'm more like the corner. But in any case, everybody on that panel had been a mentor to me. So I kind of was a newbie on the panel. But one of my former bosses said to me, he said, do you remember the time you cursed this white man out? I said, no. He said, probably not because you cursing somebody out every other day. I'm like, proudly. But then he told me about a man who had mentioned that a wealthy family had sold enslaved people in order to create an endowment. And I'm trying to keep it clean. And yeah, I went off. I said, and he was very pleased about that. This is how liberal these people were. They sold some of their enslaved people and reduced their lifestyle to basically create this endowment. And I'm sure I didn't say WTF, but I'm sure I said stuff pretty close to it. I didn't remember it because he's right. I do have a habit of, I had a former staff member who used to call me tick, tick, boom. It's like, you don't know when she gonna go off. I'm a little better at it these days. But the bottom line is, how would a white man brag about selling enslaved people in front of a black woman's face and expect congratulations? And yet, civility suggests that we're supposed to hold it in, talk to somebody privately. And that's what many of our young people are dealing with. They've learned the lessons. They've got the MBAs, the PhDs. They've hung out with these people, so they know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But acceptable in whose eyes? I have a young relative who just got upbraided by his boss. And he said, "Oh, I just want to go off so bad I couldn't because it would have been the end of my career." I'm like, on the other hand, girlfriend needed to know how offensive she was. And it would not have been the end of your career. Now it might have created some roadblocks. But, so I encourage young people to be yourself. Now, I would say, there are times when explosion is cool and times when it isn't. But I would just say, be yourself. I'll tell you another funny story. And it's not really funny. I had a fellow dean here at Cal State LA ask me at a buffet if I ordered the fried chicken. Okay. And I said, "I believe that the provost's office ordered the food." He said, "No, I saw you eating fried chicken." I kept it in because it was not the kind of place where you want to have an explosion. But I got on a plane going to Black Caucus and I woke up, I fell asleep, woke up, tears rolling down my face. And I realized I wasn't angry at him, I was angry at myself because I cut and pasted myself. Because I really had something to say to that person. And I didn't. So what I did was wrote him an 800-word memo. That's the length of a newspaper column. That started out with, "Wasn't it a lovely buffet? But why'd you ask me about fried chicken? Did you ask our Latino friends about the tacos? Do you ask the Jewish people about the smoked salmon? Are you Fuzzy Zoller who asked Tiger Woods about fried chicken?" And you read my stuff. I could go on and on and on about one itty bitty point. Well, and then what I said, I said, academic protocol would suggest this would be a one-on-one conversation. I said, "But you chose to call me out in front of 20 people. I'm CCing this to 20 people." So as you might imagine, went viral across the campus. He got on a Wednesday, he resigned on Friday. Now that was not my intent, but my intent was to tell, and people kept calling me like, "Do you need counseling? Are you okay?" And I finally had to tell them it was literally a week after my birthday. And I'm not shamed to say how old I am. So a week after my 69th birthday. So I said to people who called me about, did I need counseling? I said, "Look, last week I turned 69 MF years old. White people have been saying stupid spit to me my whole life. So no, I don't need no counseling. He the one needs counseling." So I think the counselors probably approached him and he didn't want to deal with that. But you know, it's a pro and a con example. It's an example of how I was angry at myself for not editing myself. At the same time, it was also an example of the power of the pen. So, I would just say to our young people, take from that what you will. But, sometimes we do have to edit ourselves. A dear friend of mine said to me once, "When you go off, you become the story. And the idiot is not the story. You become the story." And at a high level meeting, I didn't want to be the story. So I held it in, but in holding it in, I realized that I had dishonored myself, which is why I ended up writing the memo.
I love that. Love the examples. I think the thing for me, I was really hurt. Um, Went to buy some food. We had a company-wide meeting, and the young man, the bill popped up, and everything's digital. So he looked away when it was tip time, and he
Mm,
said, and then waved. "Well, you don't have to do that." I said, "Brother, don't ever tell somebody after you provide them a service
that they don't have to do
that
that.
they don't have to do that." Yes, it's a prompt in particular so that you recognize that, one, I'm already receiving a lower wage and you know it. Two,
Hmm.
the only grace that I get will come from you, given that I'm serving you. And I said, "You deserve it." And then when I went back this morning, I double checked. I said, "You still deserve it, don't you?" He says yes, and he felt proud of it. I see such deflated young Black people and just adults that we're not, as Black people, telling people, pump yourself up, give them a little bit of grace, give them a little bit of goodness in our leadership and stewardship. Question economically, because I was so and I've been waiting to talk to you about this because I've been so upset about this Democratic Party and their economics on how they spend with Black people. And obviously, you know, Rolling Out's based in Atlanta. There was a crazy race that was totally insulting, but obviously, at the end of the day, you're talking about at least $250 million. And no one just decided in the Democratic Party, or they were too afraid to spend with Black media $1 million to myself, to Roland, and then say, you know, put a tether on it. Now, Roland, you take 20, go to the Thurgood Marshall, we're going to add another $1 million, and y'all train organizers over these next 9 months, Roland, because that's my brother too. Because I don't want them to think it's about Munson. See, they always think, well, one Negro in the media wants all the money. And we're here to say, no, we all deserve the money.
Exactly.
We all need to receive. We. And so I think we've got 2024 getting ready to happen. And based on the analysis, I think we need to host the economic symposium to analyze the spending on how the Democratic parties spend and trust of Black people with money to move our soldiers. Because what I'm concerned with are two things. One, your disrespect for our audience and not funding us, but wanting to get our dollars and spending way too much on television. Two, that my young people don't become their own soldiers, and you still don't want to put economic dollars in their pockets. What do you see just on the global side of a $250 million spend and maybe probably less than 1% spend with Black-owned media?
Well, especially, Munson, given the fact that Black women were the backbone of that Georgia race with Reverend Warnock and that person, given that Black women were the backbone, that Latasha Brown, Melanie Campbell, is no way that our community should not have gotten some of those dollars. The fact is that we have allowed these people to disrespect us, but we don't feel that we have anywhere else to go. In other words, clearly we're not going to go to the Republicans. So the Democrats become our lone hope. This is why I advocate a multi-party system where we would be able to move around. But given that we're in the two-party system and we have Black Democratic insiders, not to mention the chair, Jamie Harrison, that should be pressured. And, you know, we were just talking about imposter syndrome. I'm not going to call the brother an imposter, but I'm wondering how much he has to cut and paste himself to be palatable to the other people. I mean, when you look at posters, I mean, the Democratic Party has a list of posters. They're like, is Cornell Belcher on that list? Is someone else on that list? And so, I'm a regular on Roland's show. I show up most Mondays, and he has been, really very, very tenacious about this point, as you have been, and we have to continue to do so. I'm not suggesting, although my younger people who are left-leaning, who we're on the same page, suggest that we walk out of the Democratic Party. I fear the alternative there. I mean, we would not want Mitch McConnell or any of these other people to make public policy for Black people. But what I'm saying is that we have to hold these people accountable. They have been taking us for granted forever. I mean, I go back and look at things I wrote in 1984, 1988, around elections, and it's the same thing. They do not spend the money they should in our community. They do not lift up our media, and our media certainly has broadened and expanded, in terms of not only NNPA, but Rolling Out, Roland Martin Unfiltered, and so many others. Why do these folks have to beg for pennies when other people just get the money? As you say, there's another piece of it, which is overspending on conventional television.
Yeah, but I want to also say the disadvantage is training of our young people being able to touch those dollars. It's not just spend with Rolling Out. I really want our young people to be active and touch those dollars so they know what it is to be an organizer inside a Black
Yeah.
organization. See, that my thing is the stewardship. It's one thing when you're trained by Roland Martin, because at least you understand he's unafraid, he's going to show up, he's going to have a lot to say, and train you to be sure you should have a lot to say and understand that you deserve to get paid in this process. And I want a lot more of our young people to know what it is to organize, to talk, and to share and to bring people to a movement, because we've got to continue a movement about ourselves. So I think that's part of the thing that might be a little afraid that our community would continue to really organize and stay together, because I think it's important that we do, particularly for this 2024, which is going to be huge. I mean, it's going to be something we've never seen before, and I want us to get in front of it. Why study economics? Why should we be studying economics as a policy, and how does that equate to equity?
Well, economics is a study of who gets what, when, where, and how. It's a study of how the pie is divided up and who gets it. And whether you're looking at monetary economics with the Fed, you're looking at labor economics, which I specialize in with the labor market, you're looking at environmental economics, with the whole issue about economic and environmental justice, you're looking at how the pie gets divided and who's slicing the pie and what it means to have different hands slicing the pie. I think that economics, I mean, I started out as a youngin' wanting to be a lawyer. And then I took my first econ class and literally fell in love with the whole notion of how compound interest is inequitable. In other words, if I don't have no money, excuse my ebonics, but I don't have no money, my interest rate is not going to compound. Whereas if you have a lot, it's going to compound. So I started with 0, you started with 10. In 2 years, you got more, and I still got 0. And so I was just intrigued by that. I remember vividly.
It's 7 o'clock.
As an undergrad, actually typing out one of my typing. This was 1970. Typing the response to the homework with the examples of compound interest. And the professor thought so much of it, he clipped my name off the top and sent it to everybody else, passed it out to the rest of the class, and said, "This is a model homework assignment." But really was about looking at how distribution works against us if you have fixed assets or limited assets in the beginning. We need to study that. We also must need to study reparations. What are we due? What are we owed? I am on the National African American Reparations Commission and testified on June 19th, 2019, before Congress about reparations and about what was taken from us and how we begin to try to make it whole. And we need more young scholars to basically look at that and study it. We have over 60 municipalities that are interested in local reparations. Only one, Evanston, Illinois, has actually done it. And granted, it's an imperfect model. They're using their weed money to distribute for reparations. And I think 16 families got $25,000, but they're going to do more. I mean, so that's a very minor step in the right direction. But we need to have many minor steps in the right direction. I don't think that reparations is going to go top down. I think it's going to be bottom up. But Sheila Jackson Lee has been the champion, as you know. Congressman Conyers, Congressman John Conyers, the late Congressman Conyers, introduced reparations legislation, H.R. 40, every year since 1989. Every year since 1989. And finally, Sheila was able, Congresswoman Jackson Lee was able last year to get up to 215 co-sponsors. Now, all we need was 218 to pass it. But the president and other people didn't find it a priority. And so it didn't, Nancy Pelosi didn't put it on the calendar. We have asked, NARC and other organizations have asked that the president do an executive order, which he may or may not do. He doesn't find it as striking a priority as some other things. But it's a priority for us. The only way that we regain our wealth, our place, is if folks are willing to do this. So we've implored with President Biden, anybody who's listening, write your senator, write your congressperson, say, please take another look at H.R. 40 and Sheila Jackson Lee. Please support justice, simple justice.
Well, they spent $1 trillion. They found several trillion that just could be spent in a moment's notice during COVID. So clearly reparations could be funded without a disrupting the economy and leaving anyone behind, because they figured that out. They could do that. When you think about we've got 40 years of Dr. King, and clearly we you wrote a beautiful piece about Dr. King and Stevie Wonder. Um, movement music. What should we know about movement music and people like Stevie Wonder, and why it's so beautiful to constantly have movement music celebrating our greatness?
Well, movement music lifts us up. It basically reminds us of who we are, where we come from. We sing, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes," from Sweet Honey. We sing, "We shall overcome." Although I always say we shall overcome today, because someday is like when, So, but movement music lifts our spirits. It brings us joy. And joy is a form of resilience. There are those who would see us beaten down, downtrodden, pitiful. Nah, we are not a pitiful people. And that's something that we have to embrace. The Stevie Wonder song that some people call the happy birthday song, and I don't care whether you're at Big Mama's or Baby Christening, we're gonna sing happy birthday. But I don't think we pay attention to the lyrics. You know, we really are talking about 4 lines in, tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King. The other thing we forget is how long it took for us to get that holiday. It didn't just come like that. Only 4 days after Dr. King was assassinated, Dr. John Conyers was one of those who pushed for the holiday. There was resistance. Jesse Helms, now I'm cursing. I promise not to curse on your show, but when I say Jesse Helms, I'm actually cursing. He actually distributed a binder over 300 pages with all kind of scurrilous lies about Dr. King, moving from calling him a communist to all kind of other stuff. It was so outrageous that Daniel Patrick Moynihan stomped his foot on it, threw it on the floor and stomped his foot at it and said, "This is nothing but garbage." But it still took 17 years to get the holiday. And then when we got it, every state didn't want to do it. And we still have, in Mississippi, they have Confederate History Month. Give me a break. Not only that, but some states couple Dr. King's holiday with either Robert E. Lee or Jefferson Davis, Confederate heroes. So people are still in denial. As an educator, the dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at Cal State LA, it's interesting to me how people resist truth. I mean, because teaching ethnic studies is nothing but teaching truth. But in California, of course, we're more liberal than any place else. We basically don't have to resist that much. I would say much. Yesterday, Secretary of State Shirley Weber spoke at a King breakfast. She's an amazing woman who was an educator, was a professor, and basically pushed through the legislation to make sure that everybody who graduates from a Cal State will have to take at least one ethnic studies class. But she talked yesterday about the resistance still. Now, it's not resistance in LA or San Francisco or Sacramento, but you get off into some of these little places in the valley where, a redneck is more the rule than the exception. And you have people who are really pushing back on that. And really, it's pushing back on the truth. And this is why, Munson, the Black media is so important. Because if no one else will tell the truth, we must. And the truth that we must tell is about why we need reparations, about the rape of Black women, about basically expropriation of our property, about Tulsa, 1921, or Wilmington, North Carolina, where basically the most influential Black men in that state, in that city rather, were rounded up and arrested before a vote, then put on buses and trains and sent out of town with their property left for the other people to take. So these are the stories we must tell. And when we tell these stories, and when we tell this truth, there are many who resist it, and we must use our resilience, is what I think our people have shown that we have, our resilience to say, oh, hell no. We are not going to allow you to take over this narrative. But to go back to your point earlier, when we first started talk about young Black people. Many of them either do not know much of this truth, or have been told, well, that happened a long time ago, don't worry about it. Except for what happened a long time ago has implications of what's happening today. And so that's why we need to not worry about it, but we need to make sure that we're teaching the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Well, I love that because that brings us to a point. As a labor economist, what should our young people understand about money and occupations and really demanding that they actually receive jobs in places that traditionally have not hired us? And that includes governments, because there are a lot of people hiding in that government job that they're not hiring us for.
We have to understand what our fair share is, and then we have to go for it. We also, in terms of the labor market is changing. I mean, working on something now, just looking at transformations of the labor market. Some of them were accelerated by COVID, but some of them have also been accelerated by technology. So the question then becomes, um, are you prepared for the new labor market? Because the way that the labor market is transforming does not work for us. I mean, if you're a janitor, you can't work from home. But if you're a professor, you can. And so I just tell you, first thing, be prepared. Be fully prepared. Get as much education as you can. And it doesn't have to be formal education. Maybe you're not going to get a BA, but maybe you'll get certificates. Now, as a college professor, I will say, I want you to get a BA, MA, PhD. But if that's not for you, it's not for you. Get yourself fully prepared. Number two, learn, experience, and even experiment in entrepreneurship, because increasingly we're going to have to look outside the labor market for jobs for Black people, outside the traditional labor market. So explore entrepreneurship, explore it with your friends. So I know a lot of sisters who braid. Think about a braiding consortium. Think about creative ways to basically do your own thing, even as you look at the traditional labor market. And the number three, do not be afraid to make demands. If you can't make them personally, our organization should be making them. What percentage of the Schedule C government employees are African American? I promise you it's under 5%. So why is that? How can we fix that? I don't have the exact number, but I know that it's under 5%. And we can go through corporate America. They're always talking about what they want to do for Black people. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, over $50 billion was promised to justice organizations. I think we got 45 of it. And the rest, no, we got 5 of it. The rest, the other 45 went to stuff that corporate America would make money on. In other words, if a bank says, I'm going to give you mortgages, well, you're going to make money off my mortgage. That is not a gift, And so we have to look very carefully, and we have to stop going lowball, run into people asking them to buy a table for $1,500. I mean, that's all well and good, but how does that change the material conditions of Black people? We should be asking for more, for endowed scholarships, for things like that. And so I think when we look at the economy, again, it's a study of who gets what, when, where, and why. We have to laser focus on that question, who gets what, when, where, and why, and find out how we begin to influence the cutting of the pie. And then beyond that, I would say it's really important for us to understand where our dollars go. Who can we boycott? Who needs to feel our wrath? As an example, I think it was I can't remember the company. So, well, there was a brother in Atlanta who got killed outside of, was it a Popeyes? I think it was a Popeyes. Should we stop spending our money on Popeyes, even if just for a week? Just to say, look, y'all facilitated this BS. The brother was in line. As I recall, he fell asleep in the takeout line. This is not a murderable offense. It's like, wake the brother up, throw some water on him if you have to. But don't, it was Wendy's. Okay, like I said.
Wendy's in Atlanta. Yeah.
So should we stop by? Should we, at least as a reaction, to say, for 1 week, for 1 month, we go leave y'all alone. So we have to look at these corporations that basically oppress us and say, oh, hell no. But we lack the collective strength, Munson, to do that. I've been talking to a young sister about a boycott a couple years ago, and she said, well, but I like Popeyes. And it was Popeyes on that instance for another reason. I like Popeyes. I'm like, your mama fries chicken. You do not need, you may want, but you do not need that. Try that.
Couple other things, and just following that same thought. Receipt shareholders. I don't know that our community sees themselves economically as a receipt shareholder, having a demand of a corporation? What's wrong when you don't see yourself as a receipt shareholder and having the ability to make a demand when you spend your economic power with someone? What are you giving up?
Well, you're giving up your power. You're giving up, basically, you support the corporation, but they don't support you. And that is, we have not had the power historically, I say 1940 maybe, to make demands. We have the power to make those demands now, and we have the power to resist people who say, no, I'm not going to do that. We have that power, but if you don't see yourself as a shareholder, you don't think you have any power. And if you don't think you have any power, then you're going to be, by definition, timid. And timid demands are basically non-demands. We don't need to go in there with a hat in our hand. Massa, could I please have $1,500 for a table? No, we need to go in there and say, this is what we've done for you, and this is what you need to do for us. It's real simple. But again, tenacity, resilience, empowerment, those are words that we need to study, share with our young people, say, come on, we must do this. We've seen so many instances of disrespect of our community, while we meanwhile happily go and give the people our money. There's something wrong with that.
Well, in addition, the economic benefit, we had the merger and purchasing of Warner Brothers by Discovery, and we also had a major number five bank by a bunch of banks in California with no real Black MOU. What are we missing by allowing these administrations to allow major mergers, which obviously causes some displacement, and not having a commitment or making any economic demands on a merger of California banks or T-Mobile buying Sprint with no major request and understanding or MOU? What are we missing economically there?
Well, we're missing our power. We're missing employment. When people consolidate, obviously, they end up letting some people go because the corporate structures tend to be redundant. Who gets let go? And oftentimes, if it's last hired, first fired, we're often the ones who are sitting at the chopping block. So we have power through the Federal Trade Commission, through there are a number of regulatory bodies that basically we need to weigh in on these. And we also have the power of our legislature. We have more than 50 members of the Congressional Black Caucus right now. Are we reaching out to them? Are we talking to them? And we need to make sure our civil rights organizations look at economic issues as important as other issues. Everybody is focused on voting rights, and I think that's entirely appropriate. But don't tell me that Black people can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So that means we can do economic rights, we can do voting rights, we can do other things. But I think that when we tend to focus very narrowly on civil rights, and civil rights are very important. But when we don't look at the economic piece of it, we're leaving stuff on the table, and we shouldn't do that.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate all that you give because you're such a giver. And thank you. I hope I see you soon at Sisters with Superpowers. I love you, so you can hear that. And know that the community knows that you're a treasure, and we appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been on a seat at the table with the doctor. Standing ovation, round of applause, Dr. Julianne Malveaux. Thank you so much for coming to a seat at the table.
Thank you, my brother. Appreciate the invitation. Look forward to seeing you soon.